Good morning. My name is Alicia, and I'd like to talk to you about euthanasia in our shelters, the effects it have on shelter staff, and what alternatives exist. Specifically, I'd like to discuss what is euthanasia? Why do shelters still use this as a form of population control? What methods are used? And how can we improve the morale of shelter workers and still help as many animals as possible? For those of you unfamiliar with euthanasia in shelters, euthanasia is a blanket term describing several methods used to end the life of an animal. The term euthanasia comes from the Greek words eu, meaning good, and thanatos, meaning death, literally translating as the good death. According to the World Society for the Protection of Animals, there are four main criteria listed for euthanasia to be considered humane. It must be painless. It must cause a rapid unconsciousness resulting in death. It must be painless and cause minimal distress in the animal. It must be reliable and irreversible. According to Animal Farm and the Humane Society of the United States, the two agencies charged with keeping euthanasia statistics, each of these methods has its own unique set of advantages and disadvantages, yet each of them is designed to end an animal's life. Because euthanasia is so prevalent in our shelters, the number one goal of many shelters is, instead of euthanizing, educate the public on the importance of sterilization procedures. Many believe this is the only way to end the overpopulation of companion animals in our country. Some estimates claim that 599 out of every 600 shelter animals will be euthanized. While some euthanasia cases may be considered merciful, there are alternatives for many of them. While the Humane Society recognizes several techniques of euthanasia, only one is considered the best practice. Because of the stress, skill, and technique required for some of the forms of euthanasia, only intravenous methods are considered humane and are therefore recommended. The following methods we'll talk about will show you the advantages and disadvantages and provide further evidence that euthanasia is not always the best policy. Let's talk about intravenous methods. An intravenous injection of a 20% phenobarbital solution is considered the best practice because it is fast-acting, causes a rapid loss of consciousness, causes no fear or distress in the animal. In addition, this drug can be used with other medications when animals are suffering from a tense amount of fear or aggression. This drug is also relatively inexpensive and requires very little training. Therefore, is considered the best practice by the WSPCA and the Humane Society of the United States. Now let's talk about gassing, otherwise known as the gas chamber. This method is considered conditionally acceptable, but is not the preferred method for several reasons. This method is slow to act and requires a very high concentration of gas to be effective. In addition, it is not always effective. And when it's not effective, it causes major respiratory distress in the animal. This method is also incredibly dangerous to the operators if inhaled. This is one of the most expensive methods used, and because of that, many shelters crowd the rooms full of animals, reducing the concentration of gas and the efficacy at the same time. Electrocution is another method used by some shelters. This method, though, is considered unacceptable by the WSPCA. This method causes an intense amount of fear, pain, and there's great room for error. This process involves placing electrodes on an animal's skull, and when turned on, runs a high current of voltage through the body, causing death. This requires an enormous amount of skill and perfect conditions, neither of which are practical in a real-world setting. Because of these reasons, it is considered unacceptable, although some rural shelters still do use this method. Now let's talk about shelter workers and morale. In a study performed by Vanessa Rolfe and Pauline Bennett, the sample included 148 animal workers, including veterinarians, research staff, and shelter workers. Of those surveyed, more than half were found to be suffering from symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and perpetration-induced traumatic stress. While many animal care workers initially signed on for these jobs because of their love for animals and their welfare, many are leaving this field because of the intense amount of guilt and stress they feel both on and off the job. Depending on the involvement a shelter staff has with a pet and how long they've been at the shelter, have a direct correlation between the amount of stress they feel. For many shelter workers, this stress translates into symptoms of PTSD, including feelings of unresolved guilt, sleeplessness, restlessness, headaches, nightmares, and a variety of other psychosomatic symptoms. PITS, while similar to PTSD, is known to come from a couple of sources. One is a singular traumatic event, like a police officer would have in an officer-involved shooting, or a soldier might feel in combat after coming home. The biggest difference between these two is PITS comes from a recurring traumatic event like repeated euthanasia, while post-traumatic stress disorder is known to come from a past trauma. It's no surprise that animal care workers, specifically those working in shelters, have the highest turnover rate than any other field, with euthanasia performance directly listed as a reason. Now let's talk about some alternatives to euthanasia. Spay and neuter programs. The Humane Society, along with several concerned shelters across the country, are working tirelessly to eradicate euthanasia and instead educate the general public about the importance of sterilization procedures. They believe with more widespread information and programs offering low-cost, high-volume spay and neuter for companion animals, the number of animals euthanized annually will drop drastically. Government-funded studies in New Hampshire and Michigan looked at the rates of euthanasia before and after government-sponsored low-cost spay and neuter programs were implemented in the area. The results are dramatic and show these programs are working to slow the rates of euthanasia and overpopulation. Let's talk about foster homes. In addition to education, spay and neuter programs, foster homes save the lives of countless animals every year. Organizations like the ASPCA and FosterSpot.com are making this process easier and saving the lives of thousands of animals. FosterSpot.com is a website that lists animals currently in shelters, upload a personal profile of each animal, which allows users to go online, look up animals, and find one that will be a perfect fit for their home temporarily. Foster homes are a very important part of securing long-term homes for these animals because many animals that end up in the shelter lack basic social skills and obedience training. They are the first to be euthanized. When an animal is placed in a foster care home before adoption, they are 5 times more likely to remain in long-term homes. Fostering is also an excellent way for people who cannot commit to long-term care to enjoy the benefits of an animal. Most homes are supplied with everything they need to get these animals adopted. The food, treat, training, and all vet care are provided and paid for by the shelter. Fostering an animal has a huge impact on the number of animals saved from euthanasia. Combined with spay and neuter programs and education, great progress is being made towards getting every shelter to become a no-kill facility. The number of euthanized animals has dropped dramatically over the past 35 years, and projections for 2015 look even more promising. So after careful analysis of how effective sterilization and foster care programs have been, we recommend implementing these following programs. 1. Educate the public about the benefits of spaying and neutering every animal. 2. Implement an aggressive social media campaign designed to reach the maximum number of people possible. 3. We need to encourage more government and privately funded spay and neuter programs. And last, create a large network of veterinarians willing to do large-scale, high-volume sterilizations. On the basis of the spay and neuter initiatives in New Hampshire and Michigan and its dramatic drop in euthanasia rates, it is recommended that more spay and neuter programs be implemented nationwide. While foster homes have made another dramatic difference for companion animals, they will continue to benefit both foster families and animals. The no-kill initiative is gaining more widespread acceptance every day, and the rate of euthanasia is projected to be at an all-time low by 2015. With continued efforts, education, and hope, every shelter can reach no-kill status, and at the same time improve the lives of shelter workers and shelter animals across our country.